Welcome to Shiny Side Out with Dave. No Mackie today. Mackie's travelling. We would normally say that we're broadcasting, but I'm broadcasting today from Australia for Revolution Radio on freedomslips.com, where it's more than just radio, so jump into the chat room if you can. This is show number 287. Pause for Mackie. 780 and 200, he would say. It's on air, online, and on your smart device, so grab an app to listen anywhere or listen at home on a Grace tabletop digital radio. You've got to get yourself one of those. If you missed Solaris' show with Jeff Wilson and co-host Jason Jarrell, they were talking about crop circles. And if you're only hearing me talk about Solaris' show, do you know what? Access to the archives, and then you can listen to all of Solaris' shows. But you need to go to www.freedomslips.com. Do that, subscribe, and voila, all your problems might go away, but the ones regarding the archives will. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Dark and Young people where I live and where Mackie lives, but he's travelling. It is the Daruk people, and we pay respects to elders past, present, and future. That's how easy that is. It's theirs, we should give it back. Right. Now, without further ado, I wish I had a guest. I really do today. I was really looking forward to having a guest on, but I just couldn't arrange it in time. You know how it is. All you hosts out there, you know how difficult it is, especially last minute. But guess what? Got some good topics. The topic of the day is Hurricane Irma, clearly. If you don't already know, Nighthawk has a live stream going. The live stream is the Revolution Radio YouTube channel live stream from freedomslips.com. And I'm not going to bother saying all of the... Actually, I will. This is a live stream, so it's youtube.com/watch small v equals capital D, little q, little z, little n, little t, capital O, capital A, capital G, the number 1, an underscore, and a little o. If you do that, it's the same as hitting a link, really. And you can jump on in, and you can see the weather is so atrocious right now, and only going to get worse. And here's a quick snippet of what it sounds like.
And kind of help each other along as we move along through the
So there's a couple of webcams, there's a live feed from the news, and there's some scanners from the emergency departments, unencrypted, of course. And that's all going live, and you can hear that, and it's really information. It's information never sleeps, absolutely. Nag knock. There in the live chat for that video stream. So I'm not streaming my video today. I've been doing it off and on, and but today, no, I'm not. So how extraordinary has this weather been? There's a lot of people talking about that this is manufactured. This is manufactured weather and it's HAARP. Maybe it isn't our HAARP or the Allies' HAARP. Maybe this is Weather Wars. Maybe, just maybe. And I'm not going to point the finger at North Korea. I think they'd have a hard time doing that themselves. Maybe this is China. Maybe it's Russia. I just don't want conspiracy theorists to jump all over this. All I'm saying is that there's a very warm body of water where these have been birthed, and the track from the birth is a natural one. It's natural. It's occurring the way they all do. And there's some variations, so please don't be alarmed if you think it's coming towards you. And that's from Twister, the quote I've paraphrased and butchered. Thanks Helen Hunt for that one. she thought it came and was going straight towards her. Miss that house, miss this house, and get yours. But anyway, the hurricanes themselves, I've watched the entire birthing process and life of Irma so far. It's an extraordinary storm, and it's really big. Now, is it a world beater? Well, no. It's not one of the superstorms, but it's certainly large. And Cat 5, a lot of people were talking up maybe it was going to go, they were going to create a Cat 6, maybe. I don't think it hit that level. And it was bordering on, 4 or 5 boundary for a little while. And I've yet to see it having been upgraded again since it's gone back to warm water right before it hits Miami. But looking forward to getting some updates. If you know any more about it in the chat room, please let me know. It's hard to get too much detail when I'm on my own. Normally when Meki's talking, I'm Googling, and when I'm talking, Meki's Googling. So we have we watch each other's back on the spelling and pronunciation of things, and some more detail and accurate updates. So every once in a while you might even hear Meki say, "Yes, Dave, that's right." I didn't say anything. It was during a monologue. I've pasted something into our chat, just our private chat between him and I, so he can see what my idea is coming up. And he could segue into it, or he can just ask me about it. Whichever way, it doesn't really matter to me. How Meki picks that up. But yeah, so this is what's going on. There's a very active warm spot. Maybe it's triggered, just putting it out there. Maybe it's being triggered by there being a satellites in spades. Maybe, just maybe they're either reflecting sun's energy down there or beaming something down there like microwaves or something. Maybe this is, weaponized weather satellites where they can make weather. Who knows? Because we're not part of that conversation. We don't sit at the board meeting. We're not proposing this to Congress. We're not doing any of these things. But we know weather modification is real, because in the US there's at least 50 companies that are registered to change weather, either to bring on, they all claim that they can create rain. That's great. Good for you, because I'm sure it's real. I know that there was one test of a rocket engine for the space shuttle, the largest engine I think that had ever been made to date, and it was only burning hydrogen and oxygen, and of course the output of that is just pure water. But it actually rained from the cloud it made. And I think that's awesome. And there's a Jeremy Clarkson clip of him visiting the loudest sound ever made by humans. Prolonged sound. It's awesome. It's not a bang, it's a rocket roar. So anyway, I'd like to emphasize that these kind of, hurricanes are natural. They could be escalated, I suppose. They could be generated by warming up ocean. Because that's all you need is water over 32 degrees Celsius. And you're going to have a situation where you can create either cyclones, hurricanes, or typhoons, depending on what part of the world you're in. You can create it if you really wanted to. But my fear is, what would happen with not a superstorm, but a storm that moved quickly? Like, Irma's moving slowly. But, because I remember Andrew was really fast. It didn't last very long over an area. Whereas Irma's tracking at 6 miles an hour, so it's going to take a long time it's like walking pace, right? So it's going to take a long time for it to be able to dump its mass. I've already watched it losing a lot of mass. So when you see all the moisture streaming away, it loses mass, it's going to lose energy. And it gets its energy from its mass that it's storing. And that's why it was so broad. But if you had a storm, such as maybe 2,000 miles across, almost a whole hemisphere wide in brim, but only to the Tropic of Cancer or Capricorn from the equator. It can't straddle both sides of the equator. It won't rotate properly. It's got to be on one side of the equator or the other. So if you could have something such that it was large enough and the water was warm enough for it to be sustained, and it drove fast enough, it could go across a continent and then continue. Can you imagine if that happened? If the water was warm enough on both sides of the continent, it would just keep going. If it could make it across enough, it would be a perpetual storm. And now this was theorized initially in a book, and I forget the author's name, that just like the Saturn's spot, Jupiter's spot, just like the spot on Jupiter. What was I thinking? Just like the spot on Jupiter, that it's been going for hundreds of years, that we've noticed anyway. Well, there could be something equally powerful that just seems to do that on Earth. Doesn't seem like that's happening now. We've not had something large enough and sustained enough and going fast enough and the water temperature just right. But you could imagine that it could very well take place, given the right conditions. And then it would just be a thing. It'd be a thing then. It would just come by. Oh, that storm's coming around. It's going to be here next Thursday, I think we'd certainly change the way we built our properties, build our houses. They'd probably just be pure concrete. You'd have to be something. You'd only be living in high ground maybe, or you'd have all these shields that arrested the winds around your house, or reduce the amount of vacuum that was left after the turbulence of your building, let's call it the drag coefficient of your house. So, and all of its subsequent eddies would have to be designed into a building that eliminated them or reduced them so that your house just didn't lift off the ground. If you were looking at a sustained storm, it could have, winds, upwards of 300 miles an hour. It would just clear a path. You wouldn't want to live in its path anymore, I don't think. So, what have we learned from all the past storms that are out there, that have been, that have gone, that have flooded, that have caused damage? What have we learned? Well, to stay alive, you should get out. Number one, to stay alive, you should heed the warnings from the emergency services. In Australia, we've seen our fair share of cyclones. Don't for 1 minute think a cyclone is any less or more powerful than a hurricane. They've both got the same rating system, and it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant what hemisphere you're in. If the winds are spinning around and it's got an eye, it's the same thing, and you don't want to be anywhere near it. We're sort of lucky, I suppose, in Australia, because we've only got 1/10 of your population. In fact, it's actually less than California in total in the whole of Australia. So along the eastern seaboard, when we've had similar experiences with cyclones, the flooding's been terrible. Absolutely, it's always terrible. Up to the first floor, just from the floodplain and the catchment areas where it's been able to fall. And you see people living on their roof until they can be rescued, camping out, living their week without sanitation or clean drinking water or electricity or you name it. And then they've got to battle all the bugs, whatever the bugs are. Imagine the mosquito larvae. Ooh. You can imagine all the beetles and all the spiders that float on top of the water. Then you got the snakes. So snakes will swim on top of the water. If you're in Miami around the Everglades, you're going to have alligators and snakes. You might have pythons. There might be some things that you don't want where you would normally not see them, like swimming down your street. So if you have children and you're listening to the radio and you're listening to Revolution Radio and you're hearing this, then don't walk through floodwaters. You don't know the state of the road beneath the water. It might have, been washed away. You can't see that. It's usually muddy. Muddy water adds to the weight or the mass of the water, and it doesn't take very much to sweep you off your feet. It doesn't have to be really fast running either. And you'd be surprised that modern day cars are so awful that they're incapable of going through anything that's greater than their wheel axle. Honest. And if you don't know how to drive properly through, even with a car, even with the water only up to the wheel's axle, you shouldn't drive through floodwater. Like I said, you don't know the state of the road. It may be just enough to hold itself up there, and then when you drive over it in your heavy car, more than a ton, it collapses into a sinkhole. You don't want to be there. You don't want to do that. Fanny just put Armageddon and a picture of dolphin in the chat room. It would be nice to be a dolphin when the world was covered in water. There wouldn't be any need to walk around or do anything else, and all your food sources are there with you. However, heed all of those warnings. One of the worst things that I've seen in the recent storms in Texas was the fire ants floating en masse, millions of them all huddled together, floating on the surface of the floodwaters. Now that's all you need. That's all you need. That would end your day pretty badly, wouldn't it? So I don't want anyone listening to this to drown. I don't want anyone listening to this to put themselves in a position of danger. Reduce your risk. Know what you should do. Listen to the authorities and look after yourself so you can look after your family. The last thing you want, and remember what this floodwater is going to contain: effluent. It's going to be in there. What's the first thing that floods? Water just doesn't come straight in your front door. It floods your basement first, because all the drains that were draining out the water out of your basement back up. Suddenly your basement's flooded. If you weren't looking in your basement, you're looking at your front door, and suddenly the water's coming in your front door and you realize your basement's already flooded. You might have realized that when you were hiding in your basement. So don't do it. You've got to really be careful. So in Australia, we have everything that kills you. Probably everything that kills you. Spiders, snakes. We have crocodiles. Crocodiles that eat people. 6-meter fresh and saltwater crocs. So if you were in an area in Australia when a cyclone hits, even if you're on your roof, you might be, having a nice little kip, a little sleep on your roof, and it'll swim up to you, climb up and eat you, because it's hungry too. So if I was you, I would have already gotten out. I'd be listening to this from maybe the Ozarks. Why not? That's hilly. Isn't the Ozarks the place where all the retired sea captains are going from the USS Navy? That's where they're going. They want to live up there. So is this crazy weather? Is this crazy weather all to do maybe with the changing status of the world's weather patterns? Have we hit a tipping point where it's not going to be like it used to be, where it was calm for 15 years and you had one hurricane, maybe you had one earthquake every 25 years? What's with the Earth right now? I was actually watching the previous week's earthquakes, and they were so active, probably the most active I've ever seen. So what does that mean? What is affecting this? Is this the part of crossing over that the Mayans were talking about, the crossing. I mean, some religious texts talk about, petulance. But I'm talking about the crossing over, and what do they call it? I forget the name of it. Someone in the chat room help me out. So, is this like the gravity waves coming from the center of a galaxy? Is that what it is? Are these possible gravity waves affecting the planet like crazy? Because I know a lot of people that have been on the, heavy mass object Nibiru path are now saying everything is Nibiru. Everything's Nibiru, everything's, the dark star, the heavy mass object, everything's that. I can blame it all on this now because look, there's something else. Something else has just happened. Now, I don't, unless I can see it, I'm really not going to go with that excuse for all of this bad weather. I know what causes hurricanes. That's what I mentioned at the top of the hour. So, and I don't think that's what it is. I don't think it's Nibiru. I think the ocean is warming up, and this is a direct result of a very warm ocean. And this would be a natural process, and I could probably, if I had the equipment, I could probably prove this anywhere on the planet. Pick a patch of ocean that isn't warm enough and warm that sucker up. It'll start generating storms which will spin up. Do it enough, you can get like a trio of what's going on, what we're seeing right now. So I looked at, was it Cartier? I don't know if that's how you, Cartier, if that's how you pronounce it. There was a lot of moisture from Texas, but that didn't seem to spin up from that moisture. It seemed to spin up from the moisture from the Pacific Ocean. And now it's crossing or about to cross. I was hoping, there's a little part of me that hopes worst case scenarios. I can't help it. I did look at, if Cartier didn't move, it might have fed Irma a whole bunch more mass because it was losing mass. And if they joined together, that could have been pretty bad. Joined together how? I don't know, like two stars, one consumes the other. Because that's how it could happen. But I'm looking at this and thinking, Jose is following a very similar track. Where it's going to go, I don't know. It doesn't look like it's as big. It certainly has, from what I can see, it has an established eye, although it's not Cat 5. Be interesting if it did make it to Cat 5, that there's still enough energy in the ocean, still enough hot surface water to generate vapor, which adds mass to the hurricane. Very interesting. Someone's posted something. Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org has posted a new video. I think in this video he's suggesting either that or he's created some clickbait, but I doubt it. We've interviewed him. He's a really sensible kind of guy, and I'm thinking that he says Hurricane Irma manipulation. Maybe they've forced its hand and steered it. And the only reason I'm with him on that would be because at the end of World War II, the amount of mishaps that were caused as a direct result of not being able to control the weather was outstanding. Tons of them. Tons of tremendous examples where either the Germans were snowed in, or the Russians were snowed in, or the Allies were snowed in, or it was cloudy. Full moon, so you could see your targets, and you're flying over there and it's completely clouded or fogged. So all of the sides complained that if all they could do is control the weather, they'd be better off. That being said, what do you think that it's been doing for the last, 67 years? What do you think they've been trying to do? Control the weather. Why? Because in an arsenal of weapons, weather is actually one of them. Not just controlling them, controlling weather, to make it sunny, to make it cloudy, to make it rain. But if you could steer a storm that you've created, you could wreak much more targeted havoc. And then, of course, you could always say, hey, it wasn't me, I didn't do that. Who can control the weather? Not us. Not us, definitely not us. Because you won't hear anyone actually taking credit for creating weather. When we had our Tasmanian floods, the Tasmanian floods, 18 months ago? What was extraordinary was they flew, even though we were going to have a huge, Tasmania was going to have a really large rain event. For their hydro scheme, they still flew their cloud seeding planes, and they drew the path, and they claimed success. When the rain started, when the rain didn't stop, they took that off their website, so they couldn't get blamed for it. In Melbourne, when Melbourne was having an issue, there was a thunderstorm that came through, and suddenly everyone was delivered to hospital with breathing difficulties. Now they claimed the medicos claimed that it was simply asthma. So that sounds fair. I don't know why. Then they came up with an excuse saying, there was grass seeds and things because of the wind, and that sounds fair too. So people started dying, and then they urged people who were suffering any symptoms at all, that was breathing difficulties, that they should seek medical attention. Yep, more people died. Now, these people who were dying, not all of them were asthmatics. Not all of them had presented with any asthma-related symptoms their entire life. So what was it? What did they do? Maybe it was a cloud seeding program when there was a downdraft and all of that material that they use in their cloud seeding was inhaled by everybody, where it normally wouldn't. It would just float around and get moisture added to it. Was it iodine something or other? Or maybe they use a new chemical now or something, or a new dust or something like that. But people breathed it in, and it was awful. They lost lives. And no one claimed any ownership of anything. And today, I'm going to Google it anyway, just while I'm talking, because it was an extraordinary event. So Melbourne asthma storm and thunderstorm asthma. The night a deadly storm took Melbourne's last spring storm and into a freak health emergency. Now, the word freak, so it's never happened before. Out of the blue, suddenly there's terrible situation going on and people are dying. 9 dead, thousands fighting to breathe. One evening in Melbourne last spring, a storm turned into a freak health emergency. And it says asthma code 1 time critical was what the emergency call dispatcher said over the radio. But the story doesn't talk about anything. It just says muscles are contracting in the spasm and mucous membranes are swelling. That's it. That's basically the medical diagnosis there. And it was over 2 days where people who weren't asthmatics stayed at home. I'll probably get better or something, and they didn't. So let's say one hospital alone says normally it sees 40 ambulances in 24 hours, but over the 2-day period of the asthma crisis, this was that asthma storm, they said they saw 1,200 people. 40 to 1200. That's something. Definitely something you should focus on. If you're doing weather research, that should definitely be on your radar. Mind the pun. Because the one quote here is, he said, "I feel as though I'm going to die. I've never felt anything like this in my life before." Extraordinary. So no one claimed to, be spraying, do any weather mods or anything. But suddenly, for no reason whatsoever, now I would have liked to have seen an autopsy of the person's lungs. And like a spectral analysis of the material found in their lungs to know what on earth was going on. But just think about this. If they were using something like, what's that, desiccated, whatever it is, that you find in the medicine bottles, like a little paper bag in the top of the medicine bottle, so it keeps it dry. If they were using something like that, a polymer that was in, very, very small grains, and we're, spraying this out of the plane, and then when it becomes in contact with water, it swells up. That could cause the same thing. And that's what I'm concerned about. So what I'm more concerned about is if it happens where I am. I'm more concerned if they're doing it still. I'm more concerned if this is their normal practice and they've buried this story. So that's why I'm on the side of, while at the top of the hour, I've said, weather modification is one thing. Is it causing these hurricanes? Who knows? Can they be steered? Absolutely. I bet they can. Can they be destroyed if they want to? Oh yeah, I'm sure. You can do a HAARP downdraft on it and you can blow it out of the water. We saw that in Japan. We saw a massive downdraft being created by what looked like HAARP, about 500 kilometers across. And it was right next to the eye, and when they let that frequency go, it dropped a column of air, and it was so cold that it wiped out the storm. Pretty much within a 24-hour period, the storm was gone, and it didn't make landfall. So why aren't they experimenting with this? Well, you got to just let things happen, don't you? What's Agenda 21? Tell you straight away. They don't care. They don't care. I think they'd rather watch this run its course. What's the worst thing I've ever heard about Miami or Florida? Isn't that the God's waiting room, isn't it? I'm not trying to put it down. I'm not putting down Florida at all. I think a lot of retirees have sought that location because its weather is favorable. The environment is good. The people are supportive. We have places like that in Australia. Retirement destinations. And there's a lot of wealth being created from those retirees. And there's a lot of wealth in Florida. And spring break comes to mind when it's overrun with young people. Good for you if you're young. I'd certainly like to have been able to go there. But we've got Surfers Paradise here, which is a very similar location. So, is weather modification real? Absolutely. Has it been the cause of these storms? Can't really say. Well, who could have caused them? I don't think it would have been the USA that would have caused it. If it was going to be anyone, it would have been an enemy of the USA. Because why not? Who knows if the USA is doing it right now or waiting for the season to be right in the Northern Hemisphere for China to get a whole bunch more typhoons. You don't know. Because it would be in their favor to test it, I suppose. So, if Katia wasn't bad enough as a rain event for Mexico City, well, what about the earthquake? I watched the earthquake. I've seen a whole bunch of footage now, and thank you YouTube and Instagram and Twitter thank you all the social media for being able to get out there. I've got a watch for earthquakes on my Twitter. So if someone mentions it, I get a whole bunch of feed from it, which is really cool. But watching normal people in Mexico reacting to a severe earthquake, one that lasted for more than a minute with lots of swaying. Didn't watch pools empty, but I saw ripples on pools. I saw, ceiling tiles fall down and it was like a gaming I don't know, like a business that has, video games and things. I saw ceiling tiles fall down. I saw regular office workers in the evening leave their building down the fire stairs and get out to the street. The street's a pretty good place unless there's tall glass buildings next to you, and that glass may leave those buildings and come down, so be very, very careful. And traffic is also another issue, so be careful, make sure the street is not occupied. But I saw people saving themselves. Now, I wouldn't want to be in a situation where there was an earthquake, because their pure nature is unpredictable. Depending if it's the P or S wave, you should become familiar with what they are. Because from what I remember, the P wave is the rising and falling, and then the S waves are the ones that create the most damage. The first one is the pressure release and build up, and then the S waves are the ones that shake the buildings. If I'm wrong, message me in the chat. But I spent some time in Southern California when I went to school, and it was a lot of fun. And there were tremors, a lot of tremors. No big quakes, nothing that, I have to tell you the truth. I was really alarmed by the amount of small tremors that could be felt. You put a glass on a table. It looked like there was Tyrannosaurus Rex walking towards you. I'd only ever been in my house when I grew up here in Sydney, and I think I slept through it. It was only like 2.3 or something on the Richter scale. And those happened a lot in Southern California. Did it make me worry? Yeah, it made me worry, just a little bit. But they said, my friends convinced me that if it doesn't throw you out of bed, there's nothing to worry about. If you're not shaken out of bed, if it doesn't make you fall over, if you're not driving. If you're driving, you change lanes without changing lanes, then there's something to worry about. I remember I jumped over the ripple that came up the road, and I thought it was just a stationary thing where part of the sidewalk had, expanded, and the two pieces of the concrete made a little jump. And I thought, oh, that's cool. I was on my BMX in those days. And when I turned back to have a look to see if I could do it again, it had moved on. And I realized then what it was. It was a ripple. Wow. I couldn't believe it. It was next to Tustin Avenue, if you know where that is. And then I noticed all of the swaying of the telegraph poles. Or like not the light poles, but the telegraph poles. Dead straight, laser straight road. Love it. And they were swaying. And I realized then, hey, that must have been an earthquake. And I didn't know. But these people in Mexico, now granted it wasn't the epicenter. Because if it was the epicenter in Mexico City, there'd be a lot of dead. A lot of buildings would come down. 8.2 was the first issuance of the size of the seismic waves. 8.1 was from another country saying that they'd measured that, and then it was downgraded to 8.0. There's a big difference between 8.2 and 8.0. You got to worry about it. Do they just want to downgrade it because, it sounds better if we don't want people maybe hearing that it's too big? Let's just downgrade it. No one will know. Yeah, okay. But if you investigate, have a look to see where the needles were going on the record, See what size it measured out to. Get as close as you can. Most of these things are online these days. You can find them. But what's extraordinary is it was only a 0.7 meter, so not even a whole meter, not a whole yard in height. Say 7/10 of a yard tsunami. And it really only went towards the coastline. It didn't come back towards here. It didn't hit Hawaii. I was really worried because, we can pretty much, we're straight across the ocean from there without anything in the way. And that might have been devastating if, it was too big. And what's it go? It's like 700 kilometers an hour through the water. So it would have come to us within, 18 hours or something. Or less. My maths is terrible. So, could have been really bad, but this is the same place on the other side. On the other side of Mexico, in South America there, they've been seeing a loss of water from their beaches going down 100 feet. That's terrible. They expected tsunamis coming. Nothing came in. The water just went out for a couple of days, never came in again in those couple of days, and then just returned like it had finished doing what it was doing. Was that where the pressure went? Was that where the land had risen up rather than the water going down? And then it got released through this earthquake? I don't know. Because these are the questions my friends ask me. Hey Dave, what's going on with the earthquake? I said, well, it was an earthquake. And it's been downgraded a couple of notches, but it's still pretty big. What's going on with all these storms? Well, they're hurricanes and it's the season. And these are pretty big. Is it going to get worse? They ask. Well, I suspect so, because it hasn't been like this all the time. If this is the new normal, then just expect it. I suppose. You see, the warmer the planet, the more of this stuff that goes on. Not the earthquakes. That's a different thing. But you should expect that that's the way it's going to be. Now, talking about warming, right? And I don't care if you're a climate denier, I couldn't care less. But coming up this week, in our temperatures, in Sydney, it's going to be 30 degrees in September. Now, 26 degrees is the long-term average summer temperature, although we can get to 45. Coastal temperature with an onshore from the ocean still gets to 45. However, 30 degrees and the next day is going to be 18. That's almost twice the temp, because the normal temp is about 18 for this time of year. So it could be nearly twice the temperature. So what can make something twice the temperature, you might ask? More of sun's energy? Completely. Maybe a warmer overnight temperature, so it doesn't have as much. So if you put a pot of water, of icy water, say just above freezing, on the stove for 60 seconds with the burner that's unchanged between each one of these experiments, what happens? Well, the temperature, the kilojoules of energy get transferred into the water. And if you put it on there for 60 seconds only and you took it off and measured the temperature, then the temperature rise in kilojoules has to be exactly the same, because the same amount of heat is being applied to each one. The temperature won't be the same, but the amount of increase should be relative to each other, since the amount of energy put into the experiment is exactly the same. So if the overnight temperature was hotter, say the water was just above freezing on one, say, 1 degree Celsius. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at Fahrenheit. And then you put one on that's 10 degrees, then you put one on that's at 20 degrees temperature, and then you put one on that's 30 degrees temperature. And you did exactly the same 1 minute under the heat. That rise in temperature is all that you would expect. The same amount of degrees in each one. can't ever get hotter. That's the thing. You can't have the one that's 30 degrees being put on 60 seconds under the same heat, the same conditions, getting any bigger difference in temperature from its starting temperature to its ending temperature. That's what I like to express. So when you say that one day is twice the temperature of the day before, what's different? Look at your overnight temps. If the overnight temps didn't change, then boy, oh boy, are you getting cooked by more energy. I try to explain this to people, and I just don't get it. I don't understand why people don't see this. That isn't a carbon blanket. That's not carbon in the atmosphere. That isn't global warming gases that could do that. That's an increase in the input kilojoules is the only thing that can do that. Now, we're pretty lucky, I think, this week because we just missed out on a really cool solar flare in the kill shot. If you read Dames, almost. It was almost right at us. Just a bit to the left. Could have been a lot worse. Tried to tell people this week about how bad it could get. Citing that time back in the US where the electrical lines were arcing before we had high tech. It was pretty much just mechanical electricity. No integrated circuits, nothing complicated. So nothing really was damaged. We didn't lose the functionality of our civilization. Because that's really what you'd be looking at. So if we had that today, if we had an EMP as solar flare, that it was the kill shot solar flare as far as Ed Dames is concerned, like a dead-on bullseye target, then you might see the end of our current civilization. It's that easy. All the computers go down, never come back up again. All your cell phones go offline. Your car would never work again. If you're lucky, it might. If you have an older car, it might be repairable. The supermarkets wouldn't be able to accept your money because you've only got credit cards or electronic banking. And if you've got cash, good for you. That will quickly become useless. If you have gold, you're not going to be able to sell it to anyone. The preppers, it's a different situation if I'm talking about trade with other people. It becomes a currency. So, when the station owner tells you that there's an EMP-proof thumb drive that's available, that thumb drive will work after the solar flare. If you have an old laptop in a trash can with a metal lid, that'll still work. If you have solar panels locked up inside Faraday cage that you bring out after the EMP occurs, they'll work. You might be the only person with a computer. The internet may not be there. If you have your ham radio, your shortwave radio, if you have one of those locked up in a Faraday cage, or you have a room where it's inside and you have your aerial disconnected so you can re-establish that communication afterwards, awesome. If you have an earth strap that goes down from your aerial down to the ground, awesome. You'll make it. The rest of us, we're going to be farming again. I really look forward to that. I look forward to where all the people who had power, who built themselves up with as much money to have as much power, and that's all they wanted. In fact, that's their entire lives. That's all they've done is driven towards more money, more power. Hi, George Soros. And if that's all they did, and then that became worthless, they're just like the rest of us. See how we're all the same? In fact, we're so the same once all of that's removed. Then it becomes personality driven. Would they want to rise to power again? Probably. It's probably in their personality. Would anyone let them? Probably not. They wouldn't have anything to bargain with. There wouldn't be enough henchmen to follow them, to do their bidding. And I think the best thing you can possibly do is form a society, form a group with your neighbors, just to share skills. Share skill sets. Now, I even haven't talked about North Korea, and I really wanted to maybe do that in the next hour. If someone's willing to come in, the dial-in number, do it after the top of the hour, 347 688 2902, or add freedom screen. That's 2 words, freedom, and like a fly screen, freedom screen. Add that to Skype, and you can call in via Skype, or you can call in on 347 688 2902 if you're in the US, and you can join me after the top of the hour here. And maybe if you want to ask me questions, this is a perfect opportunity. If you want to know what Dave and Mekki think, I can't answer for Mekki though. You can ask me what we think. Yeah, sure. You can ask me opinions. If you want to run a scenario by me, let's do that. But I ask that you maybe chat to us first in the chat room, and that's an easy way to do it. I'll take callers after the hour. All right, so just saying that you can get yourself some great merchandise from the station's website. You can buy a CD of your favourite host shows for a previous season. You can get an EMP-proof thumb drive with survival documents on it, or maybe even 75,000 seeds in a single seed pack. But you've got to make a donation first, and you can receive one of these. But read the instructions very carefully so that you're able to provide the correct details. Check with your customs departments for your country in case you're not in the US. For instance, in Australia, you cannot import seeds, not viable live seeds. Can't do that. You don't know where they came from outside of the quarantine that we have, trying to prevent all the other world's diseases from affecting Australia. But maybe, just maybe, Monsanto had something to do with it. Who knows? However, the number to call in if you're in the USA is 347 688 2902. Like I said, if you live in Kentucky, you can pick us up on FM. FM, how cool is that? That is WZZR 101.3. Or anywhere else, and I do mean anywhere else, you can get an app to listen. So you can get something called Web Radio Central. Receiver mobile app. That's a good one, because they got receiver digital radios inside some trucks and motor vehicles. Freedom Slips themselves, the station, has its own app, which is really cool. I used to have that, but I made my own one. TalkStream Live, you can listen through that. Even streamfinder.com. Internet-radio. I actually found like an echo of the station over there, which is pretty cool. Radio Tuna is another one. We say tuna. We don't eat tuna out of the ocean. We eat tuna. Sounds similar, I know, but it's like emu and emu. Radio Ways is another way. RadioOnline.co, and the app I made. So Shiny Side Out. It's really simple. You just download the app and you can get our news and stuff. You can also listen to the station, which is cool, anytime you want, whether we're on or not. And if a big crisis was going down, we'd be able to message our peeps. Don't know why I said peeps. We could message all of our subscribers in one message, just saying, hey, look up in the air, or how bad's that earthquake, or whatever. So we can get in contact with you that way through the app. And just remember, this is show number 287. And we're just coming to the top of the hour. And Mekki's not with us. Unfortunately, he's traveling. You know, he travels so often for his job. He just goes everywhere. It's sort of not fair. I used to love traveling at my previous job and living out of my suitcase, and I sort of felt like a rock star. The rock star I was never able to be. And You know, while I didn't have to get on stage, I did have to do IT work because that's what I do. And I really liked it. I like driving too. Driving is really pleasurable. I can think about things when I'm driving. I hope you do the same. I hope you don't find it miserable. Because driving for me is so much fun. In fact, it's so much fun that I'm now competing worldwide in a thing called iRacing. It's nothing to do with Apple. It's internet racing. It's a platform made for touring car drivers to be able to train. And then it became so lifelike that they decided to make money from it. So they did, and now you can basically drive any track in any car. And there's championships and real driver's licenses, like racing car driver licenses, and the people who win the championships go on to drive for them in real life. That's how good it is. It's pretty good. No other of those racing platforms offer that at the end. And there's something like, 80,000 people doing that worldwide. So it's good fun. I just came 6th in a Porsche GT3 track season 3 this year. I'm very happy with myself. I sort of always wanted to be a racing car driver, but it's a little hobby of mine, I suppose. I was bitten by the racing bug for Christmas when my kids bought me Forza, the game, and I played it, and then I did a couple of laps in a Lamborghini and a Ferrari at a racetrack, and I just thought it was the best thing ever, and I was bitten by the bug. So apologies, I won't mention it again. Unless, of course, I win. Something, and then I'll let you know. All right, so we're at the top of the hour. I expect the music to start any second, any tick of the clock. Any tick of the clock. It should have happened. But there it is. So, it's only a short station break. I'll see you on the other side of this. Take care. You're back with David Mackey's Shiny Side Out on freedomslips.com on the #1 listener supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button or subscribe to the archives for only $5 a month. I'd like to say hello to all of the new listeners, all the new subscribers, and all the new followers. Thank you very much for doing so. And for everyone who is in the chat room, hello. A big shout out to each and every one of you, including the station owner is here with us in the chat room today. All eyes are on Hurricane Irma. That's what it's all about at the moment. Extraordinary to watch this live globally and with such furious intent is certainly what's going on right now. Okay, so it's still, Hawk says, looks like the eye is about 100 miles south of Key West. So that's interesting to keep up to date with that. Just let everyone know we're halfway through show number 287. 287. How time flies. I remember when Hawk asked me whether I wanted... Actually, I don't think he even asked. I think he told me I had a show. Extraordinary. You too can do the same thing. Become an active member of Revolution Radio. Join the roundtables. Behave yourself. All the good things. And quite possibly you could be a host. Think about that. Anyway, so look, I've spoken about things I want to speak about, and I'm trying to keep one eye at least on Hurricane Irma. Now, they say that it's gained strength early Sunday as it bore down on the Florida Keys, with officials upgrading it to a Category 4 storm and reporting maximum sustained winds of 130 miles per hour. They say that the hurricane's eye is expected to cross the lower Florida Keys during the next several hours. The National Hurricane Center issued that at 2 a.m. and that was the top of the show. That was an hour ago. Irma had previously been downgraded to a Cat 3 as it churned towards Florida on Saturday, leaving a trail of death and destruction across the Caribbean. Florida officials directed 6.5 million residents to leave their homes in one of the largest emergency evacuations in American history. On Saturday evening, Governor Rick Scott of Florida warned the state could get as much as 18 inches of rain. That's a lot. With the Keys getting up to 25 inches. What? Wow. Southwest Florida could see a storm surge of 15 feet above ground level, not sea level. And entire neighborhoods stretching northward from Naples to Tampa Bay could be submerged entirely. Mr. Scott says at 6 p.m. last night, if you have been ordered to evacuate, you need to leave now. This is your last chance to make a good decision. This is what I was saying at the top of the show. Heed the advice from the authorities. Really, they're only doing you favors. It ends up being one less body to count. That's what it really does. One less body to bag. You don't have to worry about that. And I'll tell you, the stink is awful. Just awful. And in the Florida heat, that's going to fester up pretty bad real quick. And of course, then it pollutes the waterways, even worse. And then, of course, you get typhoid and cholera from human feces. You don't want that. So more than 200,000, that's a lot of people, in Florida were without power by early Sunday morning. So just in the last few hours, they've lost power. Keys Energy Services, which supply electricity to Key West and Lower Florida Keys, said that all of its 29,000 customers were without power already. At least 25 people were confirmed dead in the areas of the Caribbean affected by the storm. In addition to an evacuation order in Miami, one of the country's largest evacuations of 500,000, actually just greater than 500,000, let's call it what it is. 540,000 people were told to leave the Georgia coast. Alabama, North Carolina, and South Carolina have declared states of emergency already. Mr. Scott said Saturday that more than 385 shelters were open in Florida and more were expected to open at night. More than 76,000 people were without electricity, he said. Hurricane Jose was passing farther north of Leeward's Islands than initially predicted, and St. Martin and St. Bart's have downgraded hurricane warnings to tropical storm warnings. Okay, that's interesting. I can't see which one this is actually the track of. This one looks, the track I'm looking at right now is definitely Irma. So there's a Monday morning briefing that if you want to wake up, you can actually sign up for the Monday morning briefing for hurricane news and a daily look at what you need to know to begin your day, says this article from the New York Times. Wow. I'm looking at photos now. The residents and officials scramble for shelters. This is in the Virgin Gorda, in the British Virgin Islands. Trounced by it. Absolutely. The onslaught, I can imagine, that would have devastated these buildings, and look like pretty solid buildings too, and they've really had a hard time with it. So wherever you are, stay safe, be safe, and don't travel through floodwaters. Just something else. It really is. It defies logic sometimes, you know. I was watching, because, you know, it's not the only place in the world that's flooding. I know India and Nepal are flooding. And I watched a bunch of people crossing a very small bridge. It probably was a roadway bridge at some point, but, you know, most of it are washed out. And people were dashing from one side to the other every, say, minute or so. There was a small group of people that would flee across the bridge. The remaining people would look in awe, and trepidation, whether they were going to make it or not. And upon making it, there was a small cheer heard from the crowd, or gasps, because they knew that maybe they were next to give it a shot. And I watched this happen. All this time, the bridge is still getting washed away from underneath. This sandy soil it was sitting on is just plopping into the raging torrent beneath it. And it wasn't very high off the ground. It was only like 2 or 3 yards off the water surface. But it was all washed out. And there was a large crack, and you heard this sound, which obviously will haunt the people watching it, who watched it in person. Those people, the last group of people to go across the bridge while it was still intact when they were running across it, it failed to be intact by the time they got to the end, and they perished into the water. Someone was still clutching onto the sandy bank, and that was becoming eroded away as they were doing it. But the other people just filmed and didn't even care. They just watched the people getting, washed away. It's awful. So you know what? I've seen some of the most amazing sights when everyone's faced with the same disaster. People helping people. I've heard eyewitness accounts and news stories. I've read some news stories about, the Texan floods and how people... I'm not going to distinguish it. I'm just going to say people help people. People help people because they have a common enemy, and their enemy happens to be the disaster. The common enemy brings people together, the common foe. Whether it's Putin or North Korea, as the mainstream media is attempting to do, you can only think that when a disaster happens, that you'll be there for your neighbors, even for strangers. And I think that's what true humanity is all about. When two people have nothing, you want to help each other. Isn't that extraordinary? We're in a position where it could be you. You'd want help. And you do. And you help others. And you do it without reward. You do it because it's right. You do it because you're two humans. And that's the most important thing. You know what? I'm not tearing up. I know it's really important. I know these things are really important to do. I know that's what people will do. The looting side, not very impressed with that. If you're looting, I think you're supposed to be shot. Right? If you're looting and it's 2 weeks in and there's no food and the authorities haven't helped you, I don't think you should be shot. But if you're looting because everyone's left and you're just going in for gain for no reason other, that you don't need it yet, but you're breaking and entering, and I don't think that's right. I really don't think that's right. But if it's to feed your family and that's all there is, and you can't get out, maybe they're injured or something, and you're just doing it to keep them alive, I think that's justifiable. Right. I don't condone looting. Right. So, it's something else. Now, I've invited everyone, whoever you are, and we've only got 45 minutes left, or less, 43 minutes. I invite you to call in. If you're listening, please call in. And hey, let's have a chat. Let's have a chat about whatever you want. Keep it clean. Put yourself in a quiet area. Don't listen to the radio. But you can call in on 347, this is in the US, 688-2902. Or if you have Skype on your mobile phone or your cell phone or on your PC and you're in a quiet room of the house, preferably with the headphones on and a microphone, but otherwise you can still do it. Call in using the ID in Skype called Freedom Screen. And that should come through to me. If you're having problems with that, then go through to Freedom Slips chat room and say, hey Dave, I'm trying to call in on this name and it's not working. And I'll help you out. So it's pretty easy. So, what do you do next? So, Imagine if the storm has passed, collect what you can, make safe what you can, and tough it out until it's safe to leave where you are. So make safe means if there's floating debris or anything, can you arrest that? Can you make it go away? If there's broken glass, is there any way to avoid it? Or at least make yourself known to where it is. Make others know where it is. Make it known to them. If there's downed electrical wires, ensure, or if the lower floor of your house is flooded and you can still get to the electrical box safely, entirely safely, even though the whole thing is, there's no power in the area, turn off all the circuit breakers. So if it does come back on, it's not going to go poof and it won't kill you. Try to collect rainwater for drinking water. Don't drink any of the flood water. Hey, Mr. Rowe. Yeah, I hope I have the phones. If not, if I don't have them, you can actually call in on 347 688 2912, and that's my own number. So call in if you can. Rowe, if you're interested in coming on air, cool, you can. Hawk, if you're up and about, and if you've got an update or anything else you'd like to put out there, by all means, go ahead. I expect if you're still in your home and you're trying to see it through, that I expect you're going to have enough fuel for a generator, and it kept in the attic or somewhere dry, because the storm surge is going to really do you in. I hope you're up in an elevated position, although I don't suspect that if you're in an elevated position that you're going to still have a roof by the end of it. I hope that you've got maybe a Besser block building or brick or something. Huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in. I hope it's not made of straw or wood only. I know the building codes these days require straps down to from the roof down to the foundations. And I hope that's the case in the dwelling you're in. And Florida has a lot of Art Deco which may not have met code. So watch out for flying debris. Don't be a hero. Don't get out there in the storm and laugh because it blows you over or down the street, or worse. Don't do it just because you can put a YouTube video out of yourself getting blown over or trying to survive the storm. It's not heroic, it's just silly. So attempt not to do that for yourself. Don't put yourself at risk. Oh, okay, so I'm looking at some advice in the chat room there. That's interesting. All right. So, it doesn't look like anyone's going to call in. Come on, it's going to be someone that's willing to ask me a question or talk about something or bring it up, or maybe you've got a live feed that no one else knows about, that you can see something going on. Because when I push the play button on the live feed that I've got, a couple of videos had been knocked out already, and I think they've chosen some new ones, which is very interesting to see.
Just assessing what's going on. Trevor's obviously doing that in the Weather Center right now. So
Irma is exiting to the north. Cool. The winds remain gusty and scattered rainfall, rough seas.
In Lee County, as soon as things start to pick up, they're going to head inside and get.
And that's live on Revolution Radio. And just in case you're in the chat room and you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to paste the link into the chat for the live Irma hurricane stream. It's really cool. Well done, Hawk, for putting that together, the montage. What else? Just trying to think about this week. It's been so crazy. Oh, you might have heard that I'm not coughing as much anymore. We've had a person die, just a healthy person in their mid-30s from the influenza A virus. Awful state of affairs. I felt like I was drowning in my own fluids. It was terrible. I was given, in the end, I was given Tamiflu to get over it. And the Tamiflu is the government's last bastion of defense against an influenza pandemic. Of course, this is the worst flu season since flu seasons began, outside of the Black Death. Bring out your dead. RD47 said something here in the chat room. I'm going to read it out because I think it's really funny. It says, but it's funny in a way. Tongue firmly planted in cheek. There must be thousands of Floridians listening to these two Aussies, telling them how to survive. How funny is this? You're absolutely right, RD47. We've seen our own cyclones. We've seen our own flooding. Just flooding even without a cyclone. We've seen our own winds and storm fronts and gust fronts and downdrafts who have, lost roofs. We've seen 10-centimeter hail, as well as 6 inches across. Hail as big as a softball. It's bigger than a baseball. Hail that big that devastated where my house is built now, just before the roof went on, luckily. We've seen hail so large that it broke every roof tile that it hit. It sounded like a freight train coming. My friend lived through that one. He had a tin roof, luckily. All the roofs at eye level across the road from him, gone. With holes that you could put your whole fist through. Extraordinary. Every car window is broken. Even the side windows were broken, not just the front and back, which have exposure to the vertical exposure. People were just, careening off the road to save their own lives onto the footpath or the sidewalk for you, where there was an awning over the top. Otherwise, they were just freezing in place and staying in a car, being battered by 10-centimeter hail. If you haven't lived through 10-centimeter hail, I'll tell you it's something else. All the trees are stripped of foliage, branches broken, all the plants in a yard are just pulverized. And what's left after it all melts is nothing. You just have these big punch marks, like some huge wrestler has punched into the ground. And if the ground was soft and left a punch mark. Extraordinary. So have we lived through it? Yeah, we've lived through it. In fact, you know how America's anthem is about the brave and, well, ours is about droughts and flooding rains. We're just used to it. It's in our anthem. We know that it's going to flood. In fact, if you look at a map and you identify what a floodplain looks like, you teach yourself what to look for. Then you look at floodplains. You'll see them everywhere. And this is what will naturally flood when you get too much rain. Why should anyone build on a floodplain? I think you're all mad if you do that. Yeah, I just don't get it. I don't get what's in the government's mind selling the land for people to build on. I think there's a whole class action there that you could pursue if you really were interested in it. In floodplains in Australia, if it's a known floodplain and you still want to build, you've got to build on a mound. You've got to build your house on a mound that won't get washed away, like a plinth, so that your house will survive the flood. You've got to build it in such a way so it'll survive the highest watermark. Yeah, I can see here, Andy48 is talking about a huge flood in the area just north of where I am. Absolutely. So this is extraordinary. We're talking about extraordinary weather. In the past, this was extraordinary weather. This is like the new normal. And I know I'm stealing James Valentine's show. He's got a segment called The New Normal. I don't see anything in mine, Big John. Hang on a second. Let me have a look. Oh, thanks, John. I'll pull you in, mate. So it just does. two things. It does my head in that anyone would want to build in a flood zone, and that the governments would sell you land in a floodplain or a flood zone. I live in a fire zone. I live in bushland that could so easily catch a light at any time in the future that I have, insurance issues because of that. And I've built my house out of... Hey, John, I can hear you there, matey. One sec. So I live and I've built out of materials that won't burn. I'm high enough in an area that won't flood. And a funny situation occurred where I was renewing my insurance for my house, and they said, you know what, would you like flood damage insurance? And I said, if my house floods, there isn't a civilization that I'm going to want to join again, because it won't be there. And the lady on the phone just said, look, I want a yes or no answer. I said, oh, probably not. No, I don't think I need flood damage at my house, because I'm 56 meters above sea level, and the creek is a tidal creek at the bottom in the valley. And that 56 meters, if we had a flood that was 56 meters high in a tidal zone, there wouldn't be a civilization to return to. I just start farming straight away. John, welcome to Shiny Side Out. It is, I actually went into today hoping that Meki was going to... One, Meki was online, and he isn't. He messaged me and said he was traveling and he couldn't be on Skype, right? Two, I really didn't want this to be a doomsday show, right? But in the face of, the burgeoning, natural disasters that have filled this week's news, I felt the only appropriate direction we could take this would be that we take a level head, suggest to be safe, heed the warnings. This is what I suppose is the new normal, right? You heard me say that, John, right? Don't we what? Yeah. Oh, what? Wow, because we've had no rain at all. Mm-hmm. Wow, because we've been really terribly concerned. We had a lot of rain leading up to winter. And if you don't know about Australian bushland, what that does, it gives a huge plume of bush, and then leading into winter, all that does is turn into fuel. So we've had a really dry winter, and now we're leading into summers and into like spring, but we're going to get a 30-degree day. And if you don't know it, in Australia, because the bush is so volatile with bush fire, because it's basically contains an oil which itself is flammable. So anywhere in the world where you put gum trees, good luck with that. Well, where we be trying to mitigate the risk every winter, and we have burn-offs where we just set fire to the bush in a controlled manner. And by doing that, we're trying to reduce the fuel load. But this year, we're looking in New South Wales, because in Victoria it's different, but in New South Wales we're looking at the greatest fuel load that we've seen leading into a summer that's going to be the hottest summer we've ever seen. And so we're yeah, man. Yeah, well, I keep my fingers crossed that we don't. This is the thing. Is this the new normal? Is this what we're exposed to now every year? Are we looking at superstorms? We haven't seen one this year. Wasn't it last year we saw 2 superstorms? One in Australia and one in America. Oh, that was the year before, right? So, is it, 1 in 100-year floods? That was what we thought in the 2000s. We started evaluating floodplains and flood markers and the cuts in the ground, and decided, this is the 1 in 10, 1 in 25 year, 1 in 50 year, 1 in 100 year, maybe 1 in 1,000-year floods. But if you have 2 1 in 100-year floods a year apart, I don't think that's 1 in 100 years anymore. I went to buy a property when I was looking to buy this place, and I'd never owned land before. And when I was looking to buy the current place that I was at, we were just fortunate that we had one of those 1 in 100-year floods. Because when I'm standing right there on the block of land with the real estate agent, and I said, oh, there's a beautiful creek that cuts through here. And I could see the normal creek, the inflated creek, the flooded creek marks, and then this perfectly flat block. And it got me worried. So I said, has it ever flooded? And he goes, oh, don't be silly. And then I said, that's what he said to me. And then I said, I'd want a nice little picnic area down there, not by the creek. That'd be lovely. And he said, you'd want to make that out of concrete, he said. And I said, why? And he said, so it doesn't wash away. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, it wasn't, because guess what happened? That night, we had the most rain we've ever had, ever, in this area, and we went back the next day, and there was bark and caught in the fence at the 5-foot mark. So the whole property was 5 foot underwater. Every last bit. I rang him up and I said, hey, that block of land? He goes, yeah, don't talk to me. It's okay. You don't have to buy it. I said, yeah, because it's completely underwater. He goes, yeah, I know. I went there this morning. So, he'll lie through his teeth to sell it for the vendor and has no responsibility about the sale to me. He doesn't care. He didn't care, but then he just said, look, don't worry about it. And so we bought something high and dry. But of course, it had to be in a forest so that we have fire risk, but no flood risk. We're okay with the flood risk. It's not like in California you have the earthquake risk, and fire risk. Look, this is just one of those things. Is it the new normal? Is this the new thing? Is this what we're talking about? Is it a thing now? Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. I tried. Neither do I. So, so I did put it out there, and I've mentioned this to people before. If especially if you're from the northern hemisphere, and and you can be shirtless throughout the entire summer without getting burnt. Come to Australia for 15 minutes in summer. Go on. I almost dare you to do it. I don't dare you because that would be insensitive, because you're going to get sunburn, and I don't want that to happen to you. But our sun is hotter. Same sun, but there's something about the atmosphere which is thinner here. The ozone hole. That's right. So the ozone hole allows the higher energy radiation coming from the sun to hit the ground. And it hits the ground and it burns you on the inside. It's deep tissue burning. And only 15 minutes in the sun is all it takes to become sunburnt. And you don't even see it. You come inside for the rest of the day, and that area that was exposed to the sun starts to get redder and redder and redder. It's already burnt. It's like a radiation burn. Andy says 5 minutes. I was burnt in the middle of winter. And I don't have fair. I've got olive skin. And when I was a kid, I could spend all day, every day in the sun without getting burnt. The only time I ever got burnt when I was a kid is when I went to Fiji, and I was burnt once. That was it. And I didn't know why my skin was peeling off. It was confusing to me. And when I was a kid, we didn't have any sunscreen. In fact, we used oil. Good old oil. Yeah, just coconut oil. Just baste yourself outside. May as well use butter. So, yep. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No. So I remember zinc cream. You'd put a white line across from one eye, underneath one eye, across your nose to the other side. That was all you did. Don't know why. Seemed to help. But then UVB and UVC started to hit the ground, where they were up 40,000, 50,000, even 80,000 feet in the air. They never reached the ground. Now they do. And seriously, chicken fat best tanning oils. Thanks, Zippy4286. Yeah, the coconut butter is where you touch it and it would melt under the warmth of your skin. I used to use that. So, just extraordinary. Like that's how much it's changed, and that's how bad it is now. And that's why the Australian government made it mandatory for children to wear wide brim hats. Not as a fashion statement, because that was what they were into. Well, it could have been, now that we've had all this other stuff come out about all the other governments and all the religions. Anyway, especially the Catholic religion. However, it wasn't for that reason. It was so they couldn't get sued in the future, because they knew the sun's rays are dangerous now. They're high energy. They're DNA destroying energy. High energy. Everything above visible light damages your DNA. All of it. If you don't believe me, look it up. Now that this stuff is... And we can't see it. That's the other problem. We can't actually see UV light. If we could see UV light, we wouldn't go outside. I'm not going outside. It's UV today. In Australia, John, back me up. In Australia, we have a UV index. Yeah. There you go. And so, between 10 and 2 in the day, the government recommends that you don't go outside into and get, your skin exposed to the harmful UV rays. So they're doing what they're supposed to do so they don't get sued. They're doing what they're supposed to do so there's no class action against the government at some point in the future, because we all have UV damage to our skins. And thanks, Rev Radio, I can see that UVC, the most important outside numbers you've never heard of. Absolutely. So, Slip, Slop, Slap, back in the 80s, I remember that. That was an advertising campaign where they got everyone on board with, the mentality of wearing sunscreen. And sunscreen is good, but it went from, 4, 8, whatever it was, 5, 10. Now it's just 30 plus. That's all you get. There isn't a choice. You either don't have any at all, or you have 30 plus. And it was a really good advertising campaign to put out, and where they had UV cameras side by side by regular, visual light cameras, showing the people and what the effect on their skin looked like after putting 30 plus sunscreen on. It made their skin go completely black, which means there was no UV light coming off their skin, which means it was being, absorbed by the cream. That's really interesting. That was one of the turning points for me when I saw that. I go, well, how do you isn't there a sheep dip you can just, dive into and get completely covered in this stuff? What's going to protect me? A bandage, maybe? Actually, clothing doesn't help. I've been burnt through my clothing. It wasn't woolen. Yeah. What brand is it? Do you know? What's the big Australian one that all the bushies wear? Yep. Okay. Well, I know that the tight, so many threads per inch kind of thing is going to do a really good job. But I was just wearing a light t-shirt and I was out there doing some garden work, and I really felt myself burning, and I thought, oh, it's okay, I've got a t-shirt on, and it's just my skin that's exposed is going to get burnt. And no, that wasn't the case at all. It burnt me through my top. And that's just rotten. Yep. hmm So there's only two reasons why suddenly you're going to start getting burnt by the sun's rays, and that is if the sun's output has changed, and or there's an and there, or the Earth's atmosphere is thinner for some reason and not filtering out these rays, the harmful rays. And I say and or because it could be either, and it could be both, or it could be one of, right? That's the either part. And for the temperature of the Earth, I would say, especially in the Northern Hemisphere where they're not really used to this getting burnt in 15 minutes stuff, that it could be the sun's output. Now, the sun's output has been measurably increasing, and there's figures on that. If you look in the right place, you'll find the real figures on the sun's output, and yes, it's increased. So there's no argument that the sun's output is increased because it's measured. Whether or not that measurement reflects to a true ground temperature change, which it's said to do, but what kind of increase? Well, that's still questionable and still being tested upon. That's fine. But certainly the thinning of the atmosphere is not helping at all. Not in the slightest. And so oh, of course. One of the things that I noted was some talk about the other planets, the other rocky planets with atmospheres, had also increased in temperature. Which, for me, doesn't sound like man-made hydrocarbons. Because we haven't gone to those planets to produce hydrocarbons. So if we haven't produced them to make an increase, then the increase is the sun or something else. I've also heard communications between others which had suggested the galactic energy, like I mentioned at the top of the show, where we're going through the hyper energetic band between the being above or below the galactic plane, and when you go through it, it's a bad thing, and the Mayans knew all about it. That this part that we're going through with high energy will heat up the planet cores, is the other thing that I've heard. And the planet cores are actually causing the planet to get hotter from the inside, or expanding, causing earthquakes. This is just what I've heard. Now, I don't have anything that justifies it. Yeah. Yeah. It's plausible. If you want to Mythbusters this whole idea, well, it's plausible. We've only just begun to measure cosmic rays and the gravitational waves. We've only just begun to have an idea that they are something, they're a thing, and we should be aware of them, and how much of it is affecting us on the planet's surface. One of the other things that could really be harmful to us is gamma rays. You know, gamma rays aren't really stopped by anything, and if there's a significant, supernova anywhere near us, that by the time it reaches us, that side of the planet, depending on how long or the duration is that we're exposed to it, that it could be, half a day or 3 days worth, depending on the size and closeness, I suppose, of the supernova. And if that were the case, if in a whole revolution of the Earth, you might see 2/3 of the Earth, if it was, sufficiently short enough, that 2/3 of the Earth was completely cooked on one side. I mean, completely cooked. The kind of cooked that caused all the coal seams to get created. You know what I mean? So it could very well. I mean, they got made by something. They weren't made just because it was warm and all the forest decided to fall over and create a coal seam for some reason. The oxygen was removed from the air and the heat got hot enough that they slowly cooked themselves without burning, leaving coal. And that's how coal seams got made. You just think about that. Pretty much all the life, except for in the water, was baked. So it could be that just lasts for seconds. It could be last for an hour. It could be something like that. But if it was big enough, it might even handle the whole rotation of the Earth. In fact, that would be cooking a lot of it. So, look, this is just what's out there. I mean, we have huge rocks, miles across that could kill the planet and all the life on it. Or just, wipe out a city or cause huge tsunamis or whatever. There's enough humans now spread across the planet for us to be able to survive a small one. Pretty much. And still be able to continue the human species, right? And that's really what I'm more impressed about today than, say, 200 years ago, we're in pockets. Go 1,000 years ago, really isolated pockets with little communication between any of us, where we would never have known. You go back further, and you end up with a global impact that caused a global flood worldwide. So and no one could communicate that with each other. So that's the kind of all the stuff that I'm talking about. So is this the new normal? We're seeing so much of it these days. We're getting a few minutes to the top of the show. John, so what's your take on the creation of those storms, of the hurricanes? You've heard me talk. Do you think it's natural? Do you think it's intervened? Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, fair call. It sure is. I didn't even mention that today. Oh yeah. It might be their exit. Yeah. It might be the time that they're leaving. It might be the time that we